it's almost 7:30.
Yeah.
That thing up.
Yeah, thanks for the music.
All right, so I know everybody here already, so I'm not bother with any introductions of
Who are you?
who am I or what do I do, what am I doing here. So we're just going to get into talking about what we came to talk about tonight. So the first thing I want to talk about is I was going to talk about three things. And the first thing I wanted to talk about was some really exciting new research that has just been published. It was like March of this year by a group of researchers from the University of Leeds in the United Kingdom.
Look on his face, I love it.
All it took was for you to leave.
Yeah. I got the password now for the computer at the security guard. Yes. They said you went to get help.
You do what you have to do.
Yeah. So this was a piece of research that was, as I say, just came out, published in March of this year. And it's all about how sensory nerve endings in the neck can influence function of different systems in the body. So I'm just going to, I've got copies here for people who want them. And this is just sort of the, it's a real synopsis of it. Obviously the real research thing is like this big. So if you want to go on the internet and find it, it's got the references here, if you want to read it yourself. But here are some of the important key things. This is, they found that upper neck nerve endings influence cardiorespiratory activity. So that means that what's going on in the neck can directly affect your breathing and your heart function. So this is pretty neat stuff because although for years, decades probably, centuries maybe, chiropractors have been saying that if we look at the anatomical textbooks and stuff, and it shows that nerves from this area go to various different parts of our body, it's an assumption that that means that if something happened here, it might affect what goes on here. And there's been other research done that sort of hints at that and suggests that maybe that's the case. This research that was done was very, very, very good because it was very, very detailed. They used a very large sample size, and the design of the research was of sort of top quality. When you look at research, when people read research, they sort of rate it or grade it and say, well, is this like grade A research or grade B research, whatever, depending on things like the sample size and what methodology they used and what kind of controls they had and all that sort of stuff. So the other research that's been out there hasn't been of really top quality. This is. Okay? So it's basically saying, yes, what we suspected all along is true. What happens here influences what happens down here. Right? So information for the neck is important in control of posture and eye positioning. Okay? And it's also very, very much tied into what goes on in the oromotor system. In other words, chewing food, swallowing, all that sort of stuff. And I have seen, certainly patients in my own practice that have been involved in, let's say, a car accident and had a whiplash injury to the neck, and afterwards they developed difficulty with chewing and swallowing and things like that. And so this is something that says, okay, yeah, there's a direct correlation between that injury and that symptom. Because, I can think of one particular patient of mine who right now is involved in a big battle with the insurance company because she's trying to say, hey, my swallowing difficulties, like she could choke on water, and quite often she has trouble finishing a meal because, she'll be swallowing and all of a sudden the food will just kind of get stuck right there. It stops going down. And she's like, what do I do now, And so she's had all kinds of neurological testing done and, swallow testing where they've had her, swallow the little button, and they measure how long it takes to go down and all this kind of stuff, right? And it's all inconclusive, right? So of course the insurance company is saying, well, your problem with your swallowing is your problem. It's got nothing to do with your car accident, so we're not responsible for it, right? So something like this, which I've given to her lawyer, and he read it with quite glee, is pretty concrete evidence that there is a direct correlation between injury to the neck and difficulties then with control of the mouth, speech even. Sometimes people after a car accident have trouble talking. They're trying to get words out, and their mouth just doesn't seem to want to form them correctly. The other thing that they found was that the nerves from here can directly affect blood pressure and perfusion, particularly of the brain. Now, perfusion is a little different than pressure. Pressure just means how much force is pushing it up there. Perfusion measures how completely does it satisfy all different parts of the brain in terms of everybody getting an equal supply of blood. Right? That's what perfusion means. So what they found was that damage to the neck can affect not only blood pressure, but perfusion of the brain particularly. So how many people end up with, quote, acquired brain injury after a car accident, even if they didn't hit their head? Now, the current thought has always sort of been, oh, well, yeah, if you were in a car accident and you smacked your head on the windshield or on the doorpost or something like that, you maybe lost consciousness for a couple seconds, or you were dazed and confused and didn't really know what was going on, well, then you may have suffered a concussion, you may have suffered a brain injury. But in the absence of that, if the person didn't hit their head inside the car in the crash, it's always been sort of thought that, oh, well, a whiplash injury wouldn't affect your brain necessarily. But this says, yes, it does, because it can affect perfusion. And if you're not getting blood flow properly to all parts of the brain, you're not getting oxygen to all parts of the brain. You're not getting sugar to all parts of the brain. And brain cells, nerve cells, absolutely require oxygen and sugar to be able to function correctly. The brain is an obligatory sugar user, which means that sugar is the only fuel that it can burn to produce energy. Right? Other parts of your body can burn fat, they can burn muscle tissue, they can burn carbohydrate, they can burn different things. But the brain has to have sugar. So if we're not getting proper blood supply, we're not getting a proper supply of sugar, not getting a proper supply of oxygen, which means the brain cells can't function correctly. So this tells us that, yes, if there's been damage to the neck, there could be problems with that. What else now? All right, yeah, okay. So the other nerves that are affected are nerves to the abdomen. So, also what can be affected from something going on in the neck is the digestive system. Stomach, small intestine, pancreas, liver. All of these things receive nerve, information from that part of the neck. Now, where's the rest of this? Oh yeah, they were saying that this study involved not just taking a whole bunch of people and asking them a bunch of questions or running some tests. They did antibody phenotype tracings, immunohistochemistry staining, microscopic assessment, electron microscopy, and nerve stimulation. So, as I say, this research study was so far above everything else that's ever been done so far that it really is sort of gold standard of what can be done in research to support this thing. So the guy, put together What I'm reading from here actually is just a synopsis that was put together by a chiropractor who read the research and said, hey, you know, this directly relates to what we do as chiropractors. So he kind of put together this little flow chart that just shows the various different levels in the neck and where the nerves from there go to. So, you know, one of those is, again, right here, tongue control, swallowing, and your airway patency. In other words, you know, your bronchioles, your lungs, whether or not you can get air in. So sometimes people feel like they have trouble breathing, and in fact they may have some difficulty opening up their airway, opening up their bronchioles and their trachea to get enough air in, because that control of that, which comes from this area here, may be being interfered with by the injury. Muscles of the soft palate, pharynx and larynx, so again that's chewing and swallowing. Blood pressure, autonomic innervation to and from the viscera, again viscera meaning the intestines. Right? The vestibular nucleus, so that's balance, right? Eye position. So there's a huge amount of control of different automatic internal organ function that comes from this area. Right? So what I took away from this was not just, yes, okay, if somebody has been in a car accident, if somebody has had injury to this area, you know, it could be interfering with things that are going on in their body. But the other thing that comes to me from that is that even somebody who hadn't been, let's say, in a car accident, can still have damage to their neck just from life, right? I mean, I've seen all kinds of people, hundreds of people, and we take neck x-rays on them, and you can see deteriorating discs, deteriorating joints, cervical arthritis, you know, and they're having some difficulties with pain and whatnot going on here, but also they could be having all kinds of other problems going on, and they're not connecting it to what's going on in their neck, right? And because they haven't had trauma, particularly to their neck, never been in a car accident, never fell down the basement stairs or off the roof or whatever, they can't really grasp that, oh, that little bit of arthritis that's going on in there could be causing problems with their blood pressure or their heart function. You know, maybe they've got an irregular heartbeat or arrhythmias or valve problems or whatever. Because all of those things are totally under the control of the brain through the nervous system, and we know that now these nerves in this part of the neck are directly involved in controlling those things. So to me, that just reinforces what I've told people for a long, long time, and I've certainly said it here to this group many times. You know, chiropractic is not just about repairing damage or relieving pain or whatever. It's about optimizing function and keeping everybody working properly by keeping the nerve system free of interference. And now especially this stuff, you know, relating to the neck comes into focus because we still have people who want to believe what they see on television, right, and in the media, about neck adjustments causing strokes, you know. So we have all sorts of people who are terrified to get their neck adjusted and say, well, yeah, okay, you contribute, but don't touch my neck, don't touch my neck.
You're talking about
You
me.
do everything.
I say that to him every time.
You know? And so, you know, quite often with these people, we'll try to convince them to let us do it some other way, you know, rather than twisting their
and it
head,
hurts.
you know, use an activator or some other methodology. But the thing is that it just shows that adjusting the neck is really, really important because of all of these things. Now, chiropractor in the States, Dr. Christopher Kent, spent some time, because he was getting annoyed about this too, you know, about all these people who were running around saying, oh, chiropractors are killers, you know, they kill people, they cause strokes, blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, you know, that's great, you know, the media love this kind of stuff because it sells papers, you know, and the more controversy they can stir up and get people all freaked out and upset, the more they like it. And whether there's any fact behind it doesn't really matter, right? You know, as long as we can get people worked up then we're going to print the story. So he took some time and actually went through all of the research. He's got a couple of pages, I think, of references here. It's got all of that and all of that, which is all the different research stuff that he looked at. And he says, if you want to go by facts, if you want to go by the research, and there's tons of research that's been done on this, obviously, all of the research shows that, adjustments of the neck are incredibly safe. Far, far, far safer than all sorts of medical interventions, and effective at treating headache, neck pain, upper body pain, arm pain, numbness and tingling in the fingers, and all sorts of things. And so to say, well, nobody should ever get their neck adjusted because they might have a stroke is bizarre and weird, because all the research indicates that that's not likely to ever happen. In fact, David Cassidy in Saskatchewan did some pretty neat research on that, and he concluded that it was virtually impossible to even cause a stroke with a chiropractic adjustment because of the forces involved on the vertebral arteries weren't enough. And in fact, he showed that turning and looking over your shoulder to back up your car compresses your vertebral artery far, far more than getting a chiropractic adjustment. Going to the hair salon and having your hair washed in one of those sinks where they put your neck on the edge of a piece of metal causes far more stress on your vertebral arteries than getting an adjustment. So, but we don't see people not going to the hair salon and saying, oh, don't wash my hair in the sink, I might get a stroke. Nobody says that because the media aren't pushing that, right? So all I wanted to do with that and this was to just say, don't be afraid. Don't let the media freak you out and tell you what to think. And maybe stop yourself from doing something that could be very, very helpful for you in terms of your overall health. And that's why we said, neck adjustments and chiropractic adjustments in general are very, very, very beneficial for improving health and maintaining health. It's not just about relieving pain. Okay. So as I said, I've got copies here if anybody wants to grab that at home. Now, part 2. The next thing we're going to talk about was the specific relationship between stress and osteoporosis and osteoarthritis. Now, stress affects all sorts of things, and we could probably do a whole hour just on the effects of stress on the body. But I thought, those two things are things that people are thinking about a lot. You see all kinds of stuff on TV and that about the dangers of arthritis. I mean, they even tell people to take drugs that could cause lymphoma and other forms of cancer and possibly sudden death just to deal with their arthritis. So let's talk a little bit about that and how stress factors into the whole picture. Can we get these front lights off, Rick? So we can see the screen a little bit better. There we go. That's good. Okay. So. So stress can compromise your liver's ability to function and clear toxins out of your system. Stress causes the release of all sorts of hormones in the body, and those hormones, like hormones are supposed to do, affect organs in certain ways. So, one of the things that happens is the detoxification pathways in your liver get kind of jacked up and they can't do the things properly. So another effect there, and this ties into the osteoporosis and osteoarthritis. We're going to get there. But we're just going to look at this first. One of the other effects is cold hands and feet. And that's because when you're under stress, your body is assuming that your life is in danger. Right? And so the fight or flight response mechanism kicks in. And when it does that, it wants to pull blood away from like things like your hands and feet, and then it shuts it into the center of your body, to your heart, your liver, and your pancreas, and lungs, and all that stuff, to protect those organs. Because those organs are really important for you. You can live without hands, you can live without feet. You can't live without a liver or a pancreas. So we're going to protect those sorts of things. Stress promotes cancer development. So your body's out of balance, your cells are not getting the nutrients that they need, but they are being affected by the fact that because your liver's not working right, we're getting all these toxins that are not being flushed out the way they're supposed to be flushed out. Let me see if we can zip through to, okay. We need to pump this ahead just a little bit. Here we are. Loss of bone density, which is osteoporosis, right? So how does that happen? The loss of the bone density causes both osteoporosis and osteoarthritis. So both of those things are really caused by the same mechanism, and that's the loss of bone density. So your body can't absorb enough calcium when you've got too much stress going on. So, again, what's happening here is stress is affecting lots of different things. And stress definitely affects the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands are these two little guys that sit on top of your kidneys. And the adrenal glands release hormones into the kidneys that directly control your kidney's ability to absorb or release various minerals and electrolytes like sodium, potassium, calcium, right? So when you've got chronic stress going on and you've got too much stimulation of the adrenal glands and they're releasing too many stress hormones, it directly affects the kidney and affects the kidney's ability to metabolize and manage calcium properly. So when you're not getting enough calcium into your system, the result is osteoporosis. So it doesn't matter. You could be taking fantastic calcium supplements. You could be eating lots of calcium-rich foods and getting enough vitamin D and magnesium and all that stuff. But if you've got chronic stress going on, you've got too many stress hormones in the bloodstream, they're going to be affecting the kidney's ability to manipulate and manage calcium levels, and you won't be absorbing that calcium into your system and getting it into the bones. So, the other thing that can happen too from chronic stress is you've got two different kinds of cells in your bones. You have cells called osteoblasts. And these are the cells that create bone. These are the cells that build bone. You have also got cells called osteoclasts. And these are the cells that break down bone. Now, it's an interesting thing. Bone, people sometimes, I think of bones as being like 2x4s inside your body. Okay? And in fact, they're not. Bone is a very dynamic tissue. It's a living tissue, and it's doing different things all the time. There's a constant process going on in the bones. And bones are very, very, very vascular. There's a ton of blood inside bones. That's why anytime you ever break a bone, and I'm sure some people here have broken a bone at some point in their life, there's a huge amount of bruising that occurs. And that's because when the bone is broken, all this blood that's in there gets released and comes to the surface of the skin, and you can see it. It turns all black and purple and green and all those lovely colors. So we've got lots of blood inside the bone, and the bone is constantly in a state of flux. You're always making bone cells and destroying bone cells, making bone cells and destroying bone cells, because bone is constantly remodeling depending on the stress that's being applied to it. Bone is always responding to the stress that it's under, and so they'll be putting more bone over here, or maybe taking bone away from over there, right? So there's this constant process going on of both creating more bone and destroying bone simultaneously. Now, part of what happens, and this relates to not so much to stress, but we'll bring it in anyway because it's part of the whole picture, is that, you know, women particularly are vulnerable to osteoporosis because of the interaction between estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen, if we've got high levels of estrogen, it tends to prevent the osteoclasts from breaking down the bone as much, right? But high levels of progesterone will actually stimulate the osteoblasts to build more bone cells, to create more bone cells. So the biggest problem is not necessarily that women's estrogen level starts to fall off when they get through menopause, but that their progesterone level begins to fall off as well. And so we see women being given calcium supplements and possibly put on estrogen replacement therapy, but they're not replacing the progesterone. And in fact, there's a Dr. Richard Lee in the US who has done a lot of research on this, and he has proven that you can not only stop the deterioration of bone, but actually reverse that and increase bone density by doing three things. One, getting more progesterone into the body. And he suggests using a wild yam cream that contains natural phytoprogesterone from the yam. And using it as a cream, it's absorbed into the bloodstream directly. Two, you have to be taking the right kind of calcium. Calcium, like any mineral, it likes to get together with lots of different things to form complexes. So you can have calcium citrate, calcium lactate, calcium proteinate, calcium gluconate, calcium carbonate, right? So calcium is, it's very friendly. They like to get hooked up with almost anybody, right? But the only kind of calcium that will become directly involved in creating more bone is a product called calcium hydroxyapatite. And that's spelled A-P-A-T-I-T-E. So it's not like what you need to eat a big meal.
Can you write it down?
What?
Can you write it down?
Can I write it down?
Was it all, what's it called?
On the
Calcium?
board is what he needs.
Calcium. Oh, right on the blackboard?
That's what
Am I allowed to write on the blackboard?
Yes.
Okay.
How old-fashioned, eh?
Okay, so we have calcium hydroxyapatite.
Oh, it's one word. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
I thought it was 3 words.
No,
Okay.
hydroxyapatite, one word.
Thank you.
Okay. And that just describes that molecule. Okay. So it's got some hydrogen and some oxygen, calcium. They're arranged in a specific way called calcium hydroxyapatite. And that's the form that your body would have to put the calcium into to allow it to go into the bone. So if you take calcium that's already in this form, the body doesn't have to do anything. It can just take that calcium and put it straight into bone. Okay. So Lee was able to show, because he had a number of women who had had, bone density testing done, and they knew that they were either osteopenic or osteoporotic. Osteopenia just means you're well on your way to osteoporosis, but you're not quite there yet. Right? So he had women who were both osteopenic and osteoporotic, and he put them on progesterone cream, calcium hydroxyapatite, and the third thing that you need, weight-bearing exercise. Okay. So swimming doesn't count. Riding a bike doesn't count. Your feet have to hit the floor.
How about power walking?
Power walking, sure, yeah.
No?
Sure. And he said it doesn't have to be a huge amount of weight-bearing exercise. It's not like you have to go to the gym and press weights, right? If you walked for 40 minutes a day at a reasonably good pace, that was enough, right? And these women, after 3 months, had demonstrable increases in bone density. So you can actually stimulate the osteoblasts to make more bone. Right? The best you can hope to do with any of the drug products out there that are supposed to stop osteoporosis is stop the destruction of the bone. Then you just stay where you are, so you don't get any worse. But none of them, can claim truthfully that they can help your body to now make more bone and increase bone density from wherever you started. So that's the other side of the picture, but like we're talking about today, chronic stress also interferes with that calcium because of its effect on the kidneys and calcium metabolism. It'll interfere with calcium being deposited in bone. So if you have somebody who's maybe close to menopause and they're starting to produce less estrogen, less progesterone, and they're stressed out, then we have a perfect recipe for osteoporosis. So the next thing we're talking about is joint problems, arthritis. I want to give it that tag.
Does this calcium also need the vitamin D?
Yep, still needs vitamin D and magnesium, just like any other calcium.
Because there's no magnesium in this when you get it.
No. Well, it depends. I mean, there are lots of products that you can buy that have calcium in that form, and plus they have vitamin D and magnesium. And there are some good products out there that some companies have designed specifically for the purpose of increasing bone density. So they will have stuff in there like kudzu vine. They'll have vitamin K2. They'll have boron. They'll have silica. They'll have there are lots of other things that are useful in producing the matrix called bone. Protein is important as well. Vitamin C, copper,
Fish oil?
Fish oil, yeah, absolutely. All of these things are important. Like we said, bone is not, a 2x4 or a steel beam inside there. It's a living tissue, and it needs a lot of different nutrients in order to be healthy. So if we take bone and pull it apart, microscopically, we see that there's all sorts of stuff in there besides just calcium. In fact, the vast majority of the bone is actually the structural component of it is protein. Okay? Calcium salts help to give it rigidity. When I was going through university biology, first year biology, it was really kind of neat. We were talking all about calcium absorption and all that sort of stuff, and the professor had this really cool little demonstration. It was actually a human thigh bone, right? And it had all of the calcium removed from it, and put it in some sort of special chemical bath that dissolved all the calcium out of it. But it still looked exactly like a thigh bone, But it was like it was made of rubber. You could pick it up, tie it in a knot, whatever, right? But it still had the form and shape and everything of a thigh bone. But it was just very flexible, right? And then he had this pile of white powder that was a human thigh bone with all the protein removed. And it was just a little pile of calcium crystals. Didn't look like a thigh bone at all. It just looked like a pile of calcium crystals, right? So when we think about bone, we always think about calcium, but in fact, the majority of the structure of a bone is protein. Okay? Well, it's a protein matrix, and in that matrix we have calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, boron, silica, all these minerals that give it that rigidity. Okay? So, when you're looking for a calcium product to deal specifically with the issue of osteoporosis, you want to look for all those things. See what else has it got in there besides calcium hydroxyapatite, magnesium, and vitamin D. hopefully there'll be some protein in there, there'll be some vitamin C, copper, boron, silica, K2, you know, all these different things. Because that's what makes up the bone matrix. Okay?
And how much would you need of that calcium per day?
1,500 milligrams a day.
How much?
1,500 milligrams per day of calcium, and about the same amount of magnesium.
Same
1,000.
amount of magnesium?
Yeah, 1,000 to 1,500
I
milligrams
always
of
thought
magnesium.
1,000 calcium, 500 magnesium.
That's old thinking. That's old thinking. They just proved that a few years ago. You want very close to a 1-to-1 ratio. of calcium to
1 to 1,
magnesium.
holy cow.
Yep.
Okay.
Welcome.
Well, bone must be a living thing because people get cancer in the bones. And if you recall Edith many years ago, she had cancer in her hips and pelvis. And,
Yes.
and it regenerated after she changed everything and went on all kinds of supplements.
Oh, yeah.
The bones regenerated. There was
Of course.
scar tissue,
Yeah.
but she was fine. You know, died
Yeah.
how many years? 18 years later with a stroke and no cancer. You know.
Yeah.
So it's got to be living.
Oh, of course, yeah. It's, well, I mean, it's inside us, so it has to be
Yeah.
living. If it was dead, we'd be in
Yeah,
big
but people
trouble.
think of it like it's solid, like it
Yeah,
doesn't
oh, yeah.
doesn't change. But if you
Oh, it
notice the
does.
guy that
It
was
does.
6 feet tall when he was 30, and you get him at 80, and he's 5 feet tall, I mean, they're going down, eh?
Well, most of that actually loss of height is not from bone; it's from the discs. Because you know we have 24 discs in our spine, right? And they're made out of cartilage and water, right? And typically, as you age, those discs start to collapse from the constant pressure of gravity. I like to tell people all the time, gravity never sleeps. It's there all the time. And gravity is always trying to push your head through your butt and turn you into a puddle on the floor. So we have to do work against gravity to even stand up. Never mind walk around or do anything. Right? So yeah, and gravity is one of the biggest things that affects the bones. You know? That's why one of the big problems with the astronauts when they go up in the space shuttle or on the space station, they're up there for months. They have huge osteoporosis issues because without gravity, your body just starts to disintegrate your bones. It says, well, we don't need these anymore. There's no gravity. So the bone always responds to the influence of gravity. That's what we said, it's remodeling all the time. Right? Bone is actually extremely interesting because bone is the best healing and most regenerative part of our bodies. Bone, when it heals, actually undergoes the process of de-differentiation. Differentiation is what happens when you begin to form into what looks sort of like a human being, right? If we start with a little ball of cells that's a fertilized egg, right? As it begins to grow, it starts to differentiate. So different tissues start to form. We grow lungs, and we grow a heart, and a brain, and kidney, and all these things, right? That's called differentiation because we're taking cells that are all the same and altering them into something different, right? And so what happens when you break a bone, where the bone is broken, it actually undergoes de-differentiation. It goes back to a stem cell state. And it recreates the bone as though it were growing for the first time. No other tissue does that. They primarily just heal up with scar tissue, right? Bone actually de-differentiates and goes back to a fetal state and creates stem cells that just grows brand new bone as if it was growing that bone for the first time. Yeah, pretty crazy stuff. But that allows them to do things like, I had a patient of mine who was born with a genetic defect, and when he was finished growing, at about 18, his left femur was 6 inches shorter than his right one. Yeah. It just didn't get the genetic message to grow properly. He never had, it wasn't like he had an accident to damage the growth plates or anything like that, it just didn't grow. Right? So he was like this. So what happened was, he underwent an incredibly painful operation where they bored through his muscles, put steel pegs into his thigh bone, attached them to a frame that had metal worm screws on them, and every day they moved them about 1/8 of an inch apart. Right? they cut the bone, right? And then as it was healing, they kept moving it further and further and further apart, right? So that it would just fill in that space with bone, right? And over time now they couldn't add 6 inches because the muscles just wouldn't stretch that far. Right? So, but they got it to within about 3/4 of an inch of the other leg. So he just has to wear a built-up shoe on that side.
Wow.
Can you imagine the pain? Oh, that must have been pain.
Yeah, I talked to him. He said the pain was unreal, you know. And of course, this took them, I think he said it took about 5.5 months to grow the bone out 5 inches.
And you won't have any pain for the rest of the life.
Oh, no, he doesn't have any pain now. Like I said, they did this when he was 18. Once they knew that he had actually stopped growing,
Yeah.
you know, just so they didn't have to do it again later, you know. They waited until he had stopped growing. They had X-ray evidence that his growth plates had all fused and he had stopped growing. And that's when they did it. But he's like 27 or 28 now. And he doesn't have pain in that leg anymore, you know. But it was incredibly painful at the time, you know, while they were pulling his leg apart to stretch that bone.
That didn't happen in the big.
No, this was done in Toronto.
Yeah, I bet. Wow.
Anyway, so stress-induced joint problems include uncontrolled inflammation, pain, and delaying wound healing. So what is arthritis? Arthritis is inflammation of a joint, right? And it's primarily inflammation of the cartilage in the joint. But it can involve the bone too. You know? And certainly, you know, if you see anybody who's had arthritis for a period of time and you take an X-ray, you can see the bone is changed, right?
Yes.
And as we said earlier, you know, bone is a constantly changing tissue. It's a very dynamic tissue. It's changing all the time. And one of the things that will influence how it changes is chronic inflammation. Right? So there's always inflammation in that joint. It's not going to just affect and damage the cartilage in the joint. It's going to affect the bone as well. Okay? So,
What can you do to prevent inflammation?
to prevent inflammation? Well, that's a big, big, big question.
Yeah, I know. But it's
Be
been
coming back in September to do the prevent inflammation presentation.
Because
I
inflammation.
don't know. Someone would have to ask me.
Inflammation isn't that the reason for heart attacks and for all kinds of other things?
Oh, yes. I mean, we have to realize inflammation is the body's first response to everything. You know, whether it's trauma, whether it's infection, disease, cancer, you know, anything. Inflammation is always the body's first response because inflammation activates the immune system. Inflammation is the body's attempt to deal with what's happening. Right? Now, we don't like inflammation. In our conscious mind, you know, we say, "Oh, I don't like inflammation because it hurts." You know? But we have to be careful because when we start to use things to shut down the inflammatory process, we're interfering with the body's, you know, attempt to heal itself. Right? And so, you know, we can get into trouble with that. Like we talked about earlier, you know, you see these wonderful commercials on TV for various different, you know, anti-arthritis products. And the list of side effects includes, you know, lymphoma, other forms of cancer, heart attack, stroke, sudden death, etc., you know. And that's because the inflammatory process is so primordial, it's such an important part of our functioning as a human, that to interfere with it too far can cause serious side effects, you know, because the body does not want that interfered with. That's its way of dealing with everything, every trauma, every disease. It needs that inflammation to activate the immune system and try to heal what's going on, right? So, but to answer your question in terms of how do you prevent inflammation, it's simple. You live as healthy a life as you possibly can, right? So you try to avoid your exposure to toxins as much as you can. Try to eat organic food or as clean a food as you can get, no GMOs, you know, no chemical preservatives, all that sort of stuff. You know, you try to manage your stress. You know, everybody on the planet has stress. There's not one human being living on the face of this earth that doesn't have stress from something or other. You know, North Americans and you know, industrialized European nations probably have the highest levels of stress. So you need to try to do what you can to minimize the negative effect that that's having on your body. And that will reduce inflammation. Certainly, you know, chronic stress causes inflammation everywhere, you know, and that's why it's tied into heart attacks, strokes, high blood pressure, you know, all that sort of stuff. Because stress, you know, the release of cortisol and adrenaline and other stress hormones tends to promote the release of inflammatory hormones, inflammatory chemicals. So to try to, you know, reduce or minimize the chances of developing chronic inflammation, a big part of what we have to do is try to keep our stress levels down, or find ways of effectively dealing with that stress. You know, depending on what it is that's causing your stress, you know, and if your job is causing you stress, you can't just go ahead and quit. Then you're going to have more stress. And you don't have any money. So you know, you can just say, "Well, quit your job and that'll reduce your stress." You know, quite often we can't get rid of the things that are causing us stress. All we can do is do something about how our body reacts to it, right? So taking up stress-reducing hobbies like Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, meditation, you know, there's lots of different ways. Guided imagery, you know, racket sports, martial arts, you know. There's lots of different things that we can do to help bleed that stress out of our bodies so that it minimizes the negative effects that the stress is having on us. So, you know, you can't totally prevent inflammation from ever happening to you. All you can do is try to reduce the odds by adopting the right lifestyle choices. Did that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay. We don't need a seminar in September. Okay, let's carry on here. So normally the anti-inflammatory signals are triggered by the adrenal glands. So, you know, we have, like so much in our bodies, things are controlled by hormones or other biologically active chemicals that are released into our bloodstream by various different things in our bodies. So the adrenal glands release chemicals that cause inflammation. They also release chemicals that are anti-inflammatory in nature. So ideally we have a balance of those things going on. So the adrenals are releasing as necessary either inflammatory chemicals or anti-inflammatory chemicals. So again, we get down to, you know, chronic stress will interfere again with the adrenals. The adrenals are our primary stress organs, you know, in the body. These are the ones that are most affected by stress because it's their job to do something about the stress. Right? So if we've got too much stress, then the anti-inflammatory hormones aren't being released properly, which is what triggers the inflammation. You know, everything in the body has an on and an off switch, you know, and defeating the off switch is just as bad as turning up the on switch. Right? You accomplish the same thing. It's just like if we look at people who have, let's say, fibromyalgia, you know, and if their fibromyalgia is really bad, you know, they can be in a situation where, you know, everything hurts. They can't even put on a hat because their hair hurts. Right? Everything hurts, and they say, why? Why is this happening? And it's because, again, you know, pain and our perception of pain in the brain is totally controlled by chemical messengers in the body. Okay? So there are these chemicals that are created and released in our brain called endorphins, right? And hopefully people will understand what endorphins are. They're the body's natural pain relievers. Right? And most of the pain relieving drugs, like OxyContin and heroin and morphine, that are most effective at controlling pain are the ones that are closest in their molecular structure to endorphins. You know, they're a copy of an endorphin, right? And a lot of times people don't understand that, you know, your brain releases a certain level of endorphin all the time. And if we remove that, now you've got pain. Even if there was nothing going on, even if we didn't hit you with a stick or set you on fire or anything like that, you're going to have pain if we turn your endorphin level down. Because all of the sensors in your body are so sensitive that unless they're damped by a certain level of endorphin, they're going to react. Right? So if we take away that endorphin, all of a sudden, just the pressure of the air on your skin is painful. Right? Because we've taken away the off switch, right? You know, we've taken away that damping control. So when somebody, again, is injured, or they're just too stressed out, they don't make as much endorphin as they should. And then everything hurts. Right? You have pain in all parts of the body. And, you know, naturally the typical pharmacological response to that is, well, we'll find a drug for that. You know? But that's not dealing with the cause of the problem. That's certainly not raising your endorphin levels. That's why one of the reasons why acupuncture can be so effective for pain control is because acupuncture can stimulate the brain to make more endorphin. And they've tracked that out through a lot of careful research to show that that's, I mean, acupuncture does a lot of things besides that, but that's the mechanism by which acupuncture creates pain control, is because it stimulates the cells in the brain that produce endorphin to produce more endorphin. So it just increases your body's circulating endorphin level. And that's why, you know, if you have a series of acupuncture treatments, you know, that pain relief could be permanent at that point, because we've kind of rebooted the computer in our head, and we've reset the brain in terms of its endorphin production. You know, something caused it to go down. The acupuncture can turn it back up again and then leave it there.
Any kind of food or like calcium or things like that you can take to keep your endorphin levels good?
Not that I know of particularly. Magnesium can quite often help with pain control, but it's not really increasing endorphin levels, it's just reducing inflammation and reducing the nerve's sensitivity and reducing muscle tension.
Yeah.
Magnesium is very, very, very useful for reducing muscle tension. And lots of times pain can be being caused just because a muscle is chronically too tense, and therefore it's putting pressure on the nerves that run through it. Lots of nerves in our body run right through the middle of muscles, right? And if the muscle is too tight, too tense, it puts pressure on that nerve, and causes pain.
And the magnesium.
Magnesium relaxes the muscle, takes the pressure off the nerve, and relieves pain that way. So it's a different mechanism for accomplishing the same thing. But as far as I know, magnesium doesn't necessarily raise endorphin levels.
I ran across an article, oh, I guess it's a decade ago, that somebody did some research on music that you love will produce an endorphin response for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. That's also very true. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm not suggesting that acupuncture is the only way to get the brain to increase endorphin levels. Music is certainly another one. Sex is another one. Just for those people who like that stuff.
I think a person could be all stressed out and they say, well, I'm going to go relax, and they go play bingo under stress, but the pain seems to go away.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. Because they enjoy what they're doing.
Their concentration is...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the key too, is lots of times if you can find an activity that engages your brain so that you're focusing just on that. You're not thinking about the other stuff that's stressing you out. You're not thinking about your pain. So, and the crazy thing is sometimes if you don't focus on your pain and stop thinking about it, it diminishes. So yeah, any activity that engages your mind quite often will help reduce pain and reduce stress levels. Okay, let's see if we can get through the rest of these.
Hypothyroid very often, and how can I say it, go together with, I don't know, problems of having it.
Well, yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, if we want to start talking endocrine system, certainly the adrenals are part of it, and the whole endocrine system in the body, which consists of, the pineal, the pituitary, the thyroid, the parathyroids, the thymus gland, the liver, the adrenals, the testes, the prostate, the ovaries, the uterus, are all part of the endocrine system. They all produce hormones that have specific effects in the body, and they all interact with each other. They're connected together in what's called the endocrine loop. And certainly, if any of those are dysfunctional, it's going to affect all of the rest. And I mean, that's just part of the way we work. Our entire bodies are so interconnected and so much a part of a whole that, everything is connected to everything, and anything can cause anything or everything, right? Because of how we're all interconnected. And certainly, any disturbance in the endocrine system will affect the other parts of the endocrine system. So yes, certainly, if someone is hypothyroid, which is incredibly common in North America, especially common in the Thunder Bay area, the low thyroid can affect the adrenals, absolutely, and make it more difficult for you to cope with stress.
What can you do for it?
The low thyroid?
Yeah, I take iodine.
Well, sometimes iodine's not enough.
No, I don't think so.
If
If I take too much iodine, I might get a heart storm.
Yeah, well, yeah. That's why, I mean, there are some pretty good combination products out there that contain, vitamins, proteins, minerals, herbs, and iodine, and usually a lot of them contain glandular thyroid as well, that will help the body to repair and rebuild the thyroid gland, get it function properly again. So, those are the good things to be taking. Thyroid, Bill.
Yeah, yes.
Maybe
kind
you can come and see me.
Yes.
We should start talking about what we can do about your thyroid, right?
Well, you got low thyroid or?
Low thyroid.
Yeah, so do I. I'm always old. I'm sitting here with all kinds of things and I'm still freezing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because the thyroid gland totally controls your metabolic rate. Your metabolic rate controls your temperature, right?
So what type of product would you recommend? Like, what products are out there that would have all that stuff in it?
I've got something called ThyroCare.
Okay.
It's a support conglomerate. I haven't actually taken the magnifying glass and
To read the fine print and see what's in it.
Right, yeah. But a naturopath gave it to me, so
Okay.
I trust that person.
Sure. Yeah.
So, but my thyroid was irradiated,
Yeah.
killed. So
Okay.
I'm just wondering if it'll ever
Come back.
regrow. Yeah, like
Oh, it can.
regenerate.
Sure.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, the body is very regenerative in nature. Some parts more than others. Like you talked about bone being incredible because it actually reverts back to a fetal state and just creates itself all over again. But even things like the liver, especially, they do a lot of what they call living liver transplants now, because if they can find somebody who's a blood and tissue match, and they're willing to give up part of their liver,
That works.
they can go in there and take out like a quarter of their liver and give it to somebody else who's a match, right? And that liver in that recipient will grow to full size, and the person that they took the part of the liver out of, within a year, that liver will regenerate back to its original size.
Yeah.
But why wouldn't their ordinary liver, what happens to the liver when they need a liver transplant or whatever? Why would the liver just shut down? Is there-
Oh, all kinds of reasons. Yeah, lots of people
Cirrhosis.
like their alcohol a little bit too much, or there are people who have, for various different reasons, become exposed to high levels of toxic chemicals. Let's say, maybe they're working somewhere where their adequate protection hasn't been taken, and they've inhaled toxic fumes or something like that.
Well, Clark goes into parasites a lot. Hulda Clark book, when
Yeah.
she was
Oh,
alive,
yeah.
she talked
Oh, yeah.
about parasites affecting.
As far as
us.
Hulda Clark is concerned, everything is caused by liver
Yeah,
fluids,
she says everyone's parasite.
And, I'm sorry, I had tremendous respect for Hulda Clark, but I disagree with her. And lots of other natural healers do too, because they've just seen way too many people who have the sort of thing that Clark says can only be caused by parasites, and yet these people don't have parasites.
Yeah,
okay?
that's right, yeah.
But, so yeah, parasites can be one cause of that, for sure.
But anything like, you look back to Otto Warburg, and anything that deprives the cells of oxygen at the cellular level
Yes.
causes it to mutate. So that could be chemical, that could be radiation, that could be a whole
Sure.
parasite, could
Stress.
be anything, stress.
Stress.
Could be all these things.
Oh, yeah,
That's
absolutely.
why I don't totally agree with her either, but
No,
she had some, the diet she put you on and everything,
Oh,
was
yeah.
very healthy,
yeah. No, I say I have tremendous respect for Hulda Clark, and she had a lot of very good ideas, but I just disagree with her contention that everything
No,
is
I don't
caused by
agree with that.
parasites. But certainly, yeah, there are all sorts of reasons why a person's liver could become so damaged that they have to get a new one, right? Look at David Crosby, from the Crosby, Stills and Nash. He had to get a liver transplant, and he was quite open about it. He said, because I was an idiot in my 20s and did so many drugs and so much booze and cigarettes and, all sorts of stuff like that, massive amounts of cocaine and heroin,
but you would
and
think
stuff,
when
and it just
they-
trashed his liver.
And you think when they quit though, that the liver would regenerate. I know one guy that was told, you
Yeah.
better quit, this is
But
back in
it
his
depends on
20s.
when they quit. There is a point of no return, where if you damage the liver enough, it can't regenerate itself.
Yeah.
And it
Well,
can't even continue to function properly.
one guy I know, he had liver problems and he had some kind of a disease of some kind. And he drank so much and they told him, you can't drink no more. And he quit for, must have been 9, 10 years. And now, he's been back on the booze now for 15 years, real heavy, he's still alive,
Yeah.
So the body sometimes,
Oh, yeah, the body will try real hard to repair itself.
Yeah.
How about using like a better source of iodine or something from Himalayan pink salts?
Yeah.
Has iodine, is it?
Well, yeah, but yeah.
Instead of table salt.
Sometimes you need more than just iodine, though, to repair a thyroid gland. Yeah, iodine's essential, but sometimes just iodine just isn't enough.
they've taken it out of lots of the salts now. If you look at the, what's
Yeah.
that big salt mine, anyway, it says no iodine
Yeah,
now.
de-iodized salt.
Yeah, they took it out now, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, this is the thing, we've known for a long time that salt, including the iodine that's in it, is absolutely essential for life. So this crazy bit about, you shouldn't have salt because it's going to give you high blood pressure, is a farce to begin with. The research that they used to support that was pretty shaky research at best. But absolutely. Why in the world would animals travel miles and miles and miles and miles to a salt lick?
Yeah.
Put themselves at risk of being killed by a wolf or a cougar or whatever.
You run up and down the highways trying to eat it.
Or to run up and down the highway and get hit by a car trying to lick the salt off the side of the road where it was plowed over, because they need it. If we look at the term salary, meaning something that somebody's paid, right, comes from the Latin salarium, which is just Latin for salt, because quite often Roman legions got paid in salt instead of money, because they could take that salt and use it to buy anything. You can go buy food, you can go buy clothing, you can buy anything with salt.
So it must be sodium, because we certainly don't need a lot of chlorine.
Well, you got to remember that salt is more than just sodium chloride. There are other
all right.
minerals involved in it as well.
Okay.
And chloride is not the same thing as chlorine.
Okay.
Now, those little chemical differences make a big difference.
How about the Himalayan salt?
Yeah, well, no, Himalayan salt is good, Celtic sea
Minerals in
salt
there.
is good, French sea salt is good, you know, there's lots of good salts all over the world, you know. And yes, it's good to eat those, but, you know, to bring it all the way back to the original question, sometimes just taking extra iodine isn't enough to rebuild and repair a thyroid gland.
Every note.
Yeah, when I was in Poland 4 years ago, the salt mines outside Krakow,
Yeah,
I used to bring people down the salt mine
yeah,
for their health and breathing and, yeah.
yeah. Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Just to be in the air.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you look at, if you look at, you know, all of the
It feels really good and
all of the
energizing.
hot springs all over the world that have a reputation for being healing waters, you know, and people will come there for miles around just to sit and soak. All those things have a very high salt content in the water. I mean, they're not seawater, but they still have those hot water springs occur in an area generally where there's a volcanic vent. And a volcanic vent means that, you know, minerals in the form of magma and liquid rock and that are being brought up from deep down in the Earth's core and brought to the surface, and they end up in the water. Right? That's why those waters have healing properties. That's why people come from
Well-
miles around to sit in them.
What's Epsom salt? Like people soak in Epsom salt in the bathtub and they say that's very good for a person too.
I think that's potassium chloride.
Yeah.
And magnesium also.
Yeah.
But I think-
Or you can have
Yes.
magnesium
I
chloride
think
as well,
so.
yeah. So like I say, you can, I mean, the term salt is a specific chemical state, right? You know, something could be an acid, or it could be a base, or it could be a salt, right? You know, so you can have a salt of many different minerals, right? Salt is just a chemical state that an atom can exist in, right? We think of it as salt as just table salt or whatever, but in reality, if you study chemistry, lots of things can be a salt.
Do you feel like wandering off topic? Talk about colloids. That's another form, and why are they important? And you don't have to answer if you don't really want to.
Well, I mean, unless we have tremendous opposition from the group to me answering the question.
I can learn something.
I'll answer the question, you know. A colloidal mineral, or a colloidal anything, is just something that exists in a very, very, very small particle, right? And so it's in suspension in a liquid. Usually it's water, but it doesn't have to be, okay? But what it means is that this particle is so small that it will stay in suspension. It won't sediment out to the bottom, right? From gravity.
Yeah, but
And so things that are in a colloidal state tend to be more easily absorbable into our bloodstream from our digestive system.
But it isn't sodium ions and chlorine ions in a colloid. It has to be small particles of salt, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm not insane.
No.
Thank you.
Or at least that doesn't prove it. Anyway, so stress overloads the adrenals and it shuts down the anti-inflammatory production, the anti-inflammatory chemical production. So your anti-inflammatory reactions are compromised from stress. Okay. We can get through this, I'm sure.
Yeah.
At some point. Let's see what it says next. Okay, so forget that. That's another aspect of stress, but we're not going to talk about that. Okay, so we've covered stress and its effect on bone and joint, osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, and all that. Just making sure that we're, you know, delivering as advertised.
Yeah.
So, part 3 of the talk, we're going to talk about microcurrent therapy, and in particular, the device that we use at our clinic for doing that, which is a device called an Electroacuscope. So, that's that right there. So all I did was go on the internet. Do you want to pop this lights back up again? And the screen.
What do you call that thing? Electro?
No, turn it on.
An electroacuscope. Okay, so I just printed this off, and as I said, these are all the front. People can grab a copy. I made about 10 copies, so there should be enough for everybody. So microcurrent is, as the name implies, an electrical current that's at a very low level. So what we're talking about is millions of a volt or millions of an amp, right? And so what we're doing is we're generating a current that mimics the body's own electrical currents, like the neurological signals that go through our nerve system and the other electrical potential signals that travel through the fascia. Just to jump off topic for just a second here. Does everybody understand that the fascia, which is a connective tissue bag that we exist in, it's just under the surface of the skin, and it covers us from the top of our head to the bottoms of our feet, and it goes inside us, it wraps around every muscle, around every bone, around every organ, around every gland. The only cells in our body that are not encased in fascia are the circulating white blood cells in our blood. Every other cell in the body is encased in fascia. Fascia is made out of connective tissue fibers, and here's the really crazy part, and the reason why any kind of bodywork therapy that involves one person touching another is that the fascia is piezoelectric and piezophotonic. Okay. I like this writing on the word stuff. So we're talking piezo electric and piezo photonic. And what that means is that when you put pressure on the fascia, it generates electrical signals and it generates photonic signals, which means information packages that are tied up in a photon of light that travels through fiber optic fibers inside the fascia at the speed of light. Okay? Now, they've known for a long time that something like this existed because they know with tremendous precision how fast a neurological impulse can travel through a nerve. And yet they saw in research settings reactions in the body that were so quick that it couldn't be the nerve system involved because it's too slow. Okay? So the fascia is a secondary communication and information transfer network within the body that can exchange information at the speed of light through this piezophotonic property that it has. Okay. So this is where the scope gets interesting, or microcurrent therapy gets interesting, because again, we're dealing with a device that can generate electrical signals that are of the same magnitude as the electrical signals that our body uses to control things already, right? So if we're using something like TENS or interferential current, we're talking thousands of a volt, which is way too high. And so they have their place, they have a purpose, they quite often get good results, but they're shocking the system. Okay? The microcurrent sometimes can achieve different results, not necessarily better, but different results, because again, we're fooling the tissue into thinking that this control signal is coming from the brain. but it's not. It's coming from the machine, right? So let's say we're trying to improve healing in something that needs to heal. You know, it's a burn, or it's a break, or it's a damaged tissue of some kind, right? Well, the brain might send a signal down there to trigger the cells to generate, create more collagen, create more protein, you know, do some healing type work. And that signal might last for a few thousandths of a second, right? So the cell responds a little bit and then stops responding because it didn't get the signal, right? But if we send a signal to the cell that mimics the one coming from the brain, telling this cell, okay, you got to do some healing, you got to produce some collagen, you got to make some protein, you got to do some healing here, and that signal lasts for 20 minutes instead of a thousandth of a second, how much more healing takes place then because of that? That's the beauty of microcurrent therapy. It's because, again, we're fooling the cell into thinking that these commands are coming from the brain through the nervous system, but they're not. Okay? So I give you an example of how that might work. I had a woman one time who came down from Fort Francis, and she had a hole on the top of her foot, about the size of a tunic, that would not heal. It was raw flesh. The skin wouldn't grow. And what had happened is she'd had bunion surgery. She'd developed a post-op infection, had to go back into the hospital, get intravenous antibiotics and all this stuff to heal the infection in her foot from the surgery. The infection was healed, but she was left with this spot on the top of her foot that would not heal, would not grow new skin. So and this had been like this for 5 months now. Right? She went back to the doctor and said, well, what are we going to do about this hole in the top of my foot? You know? And the doctor said, well, you know, you're old and you got poor circulation in your feet, and you know, just live with it, you know. And she said, well, that might be okay for right now. It's summertime. I can wear sandals and so on. What happens when winter comes? I'm going to have to put socks and put my foot in boots, and so I get infected again. Well, you know, you're old and they didn't have any answers for it. So somehow, I forget how she heard about me, and so she came in, and she came in on Friday, and we treated her in the afternoon with the scope, and she came back the next day on Saturday, and we treated her in the morning and then again in the afternoon, because she was from out of town. Right? So then I said, well, you know, if you can come back next weekend, like Thursday or something, that would be better, you know. And she said, oh yeah, let's do that. So she came back the next week, and she came in on Thursday. We treated her Thursday afternoon, Friday morning, Friday afternoon, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon. She got 5 treatments in 3 days. And she says, oh yeah, it feels different, you know. I said, well, you know, go back to Fort Francis and come back next weekend and we'll do the same thing again. She says, okay. So Monday morning she phones me and she's on stage. She says, there's something happening. There's something happening. I said, well, what's happening? And she says, I don't know. You know, it's all pink around the edges and it feels like tingly. You know, and I said, well, that's good. You know. So she came back the next weekend. Same thing again. You know, 5 treatments, 3 days. She goes, oh yeah, this feels really good. I said, well, let's just see what happens now. You know, maybe you don't need to come back, right? So, again, you know, she went home Saturday. She phones me up on Monday again. She goes, there's skin growing. There's skin growing. And I said, great. Okay, well, then you don't need to come back, you know. And so that was it. It healed. Right? Now, it hadn't healed in 5 months. And then in, you know, 2.5 weeks, it started to grow skin. Because again, we stimulated the cells. Because all I did was go around the thing, you know, close to the edge, but not on the raw tissue, but on the skin. Just went around that in a circle and stimulated all those cells to grow new skin. I had another girl that came in, and this one was really neat because she was a spina bifida patient, okay? And she walked with braces and canes and had very poor control over her legs because she didn't have a good nerve system from about here down because, you know, the spine wasn't fully formed because with spina bifida. But she was a champion Paralympic swimmer. And she was all upset because she was training for a big meet that was coming up. But what had happened was she had slipped and fallen on the pool deck. And she ended up in a wheelchair for a couple of weeks because she couldn't walk. And being in the wheelchair, she developed a pressure sore right there. Right? And so the doctor would let her in the pool. She's got an open sore, right, around the pool. So she's panicking because she can't train for this meet that she's got coming up, right? So her swim coach and I had worked together because years ago I was the chairman of medical services for, they had the Paralympic Games here a number of years ago. So he and I had met and we talked about lots of different things. And he says, well, go see Dr. Schroeder. I think he's got something that'll work for you. So she came and saw me, and of course because she was local, I just said, well, come in a couple times a day, every day. Right? So she came in morning, afternoon, morning, afternoon, morning, afternoon. By Thursday, it was healed.
Wow.
And she was back in the pool. And this was a woman who didn't have proper nerve control down here to start with because of spina bifida, and yet the scope still stimulated that healing. Had another lady who, same deal, she had bunion surgery done, developed a post-op infection, and it got into her bone. So she had osteomyelitis, infection in the bone, and they told her at the hospital, oh, we're really sorry, but now you have infection in the bone, it will never heal, and you have to be on antibiotics the rest of your life. And she just said, oh, I don't think so. So she came and saw me. We immediately put her on about 8,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day, and some E and some D, and some citricidal, grapefruit seed extract, and we started scoping her leg because it was in her shin bone. Right? So we did that for, she came in 3 times a week, and we did that for a month. At the end of the month, she was supposed to go back to the hospital anyway for a checkup, right? And they did a gallium arsenide scan on her, and they said, oh, wow. Oh, that's amazing. You're so lucky. The antibiotics worked really, really well, and your infection's all gone. She handed him his bottle back and said, I never took them. And then the doctor was like, well, I've never seen one of these heal themselves before. And she said, that's not what happened. But of course, when she tried to tell him that she saw this miracle silver machine that got rid of the infection, he just told her that was crazy. No way that could have happened. So this is just information about microcurrent therapy, what it is, how it works, all that kind of stuff. This is some information from the company that makes this, about this particular technology. And I mean, there are lots of microcurrent therapy devices on the market. This particular one is the only one that is biofeedback controlled. In other words, this thing has a computer inside it, and when we put the probes on the patient, they're made out of brass, not black rubber like virtually all the other ones on the market, because the brass allows for a two-way flow of information. So the machine will actually send in a treating signal for a few seconds, and then read the response from the tissue to that treatment. And then if it needs to, it will alter its treatment parameters. It will alter the frequency, the waveform, etc., to cope with whatever changes are taking place in the tissue because of the treatment. And it does that continuously throughout the whole treatment. It's the only machine on the market that does that. All the rest will send in a microcurrent signal, and they are effective, because we talked about the microcurrent mimics the natural signals from the body. They're not as effective as this one, because this one actually changes what it's doing in response to how the tissue is improving.
Actually, that cost quite a penny.
Oh, it wasn't that expensive, it was only $10,000.
$10,000 suitcase, my God.
Yeah, $10,000 suitcase.
We've had that quite a while.
But this thing, the suitcase part is kind of cool because it makes it portable.
Yeah.
So I can take this anywhere, and I have taken it to people's homes before, if they were unable to come in for whatever.
How did you find out about this machine? Do you get notices or?
Well, no, actually, 28 years ago, when I first started out in chiropractic, I was an associate at the Gleason Clinic with Dr. Dan Gleason. Some of you here may have heard of him. And they had an Acuscope there. They didn't have the portable one, they had just a stationary one. And so they were already using it, they'd been using it for years. And so I found out about it. I'd never heard of it until I went to work with him. And found out about it, and when I decided I was going to set up my own shop, I thought I'd better have one of these. Because I had already seen what it could do on the people that I was treating over there.
I'm halfway through a book. It's getting a little boring because the researcher is painstakingly talking about regrowth of frog because he had one electrode here and one electrode here and all the details.
Yeah.
But it's talking about microcurrents and life and things that he lost grant money because people said, oh, well, that can't be true.
Oh, you're reading the Body Electric.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Yes, I am, and it's,
Yeah. Well, keep reading, it gets better.
it does, thank you.
But yeah, in that book, he pointed out, and that's where actually I got the information about how bone actually regenerates by dedifferentiating. So if you keep reading, you'll get to that part. It gets pretty interesting.
Who's the book by?
Huh?
Who's the book by?
Becker, Robert Becker.
Yeah, 1970.
Yeah, it's Body Electric. And back in
The
the,
Nobel Peace Prize for that.
yeah,
Oh,
but they cut off his funding.
yeah.
I think
Yeah,
they
they
started
were-
into
they were very
regeneration of
close.
tissue.
Well, yeah,
They
because
started-
they actually achieved limb regeneration in a rat.
Yes.
Yeah,
In a
Yeah,
rat.
yeah.
they still do it,
Yeah.
not through that funding, but other guys are doing it. They grow teeth, they grow bones, they grow all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
I saw one where they actually had the fascia of a heart
Yeah.
with all the cells removed.
Right.
And he introduced stem cells into this fascia.
Yeah.
With the nutrients, they grew it with the microcurrent.
Yep.
It grew into a new heart that actually started to beat.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Well, this
Oh,
is
my
the
Lord.
thing, you see, was that his funding got cut off because of the old, well, everybody knows you can't grow a new leg on a rat, right?
Yes.
Oh. And he, in fact, in the book, he devotes a whole chapter to the politics of research. You know, and he says how, research is a double-edged sword. Yes, we need research to prove things, but unfortunately, the people who determine what research gets published and what doesn't are all humans. And all of them have a career and a reputation that may have been built on the very thing that this research disproves.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so they're in a position to say, well, that's never seen the light of day,
Yeah.
because then their whole career falls apart, because everything that they did was wrong. Right?
Yeah, there's also a publishing bias.
Yes.
We don't see all the research.
No.
Thankfully, there's a champion in England. His name is something like Malcolm Gladwell, but it isn't Malcolm Gladwell. Maybe it's Goldman or something like that,
Yeah.
who's staying on top of the issue and saying, you know what, you have to publish balanced stuff.
Yeah.
We've got to see the downside research and the upside research.
Yeah. Well, that's why the downside research on vaccination never gets published. So
They
it's
can keep,
$1 billion business, that's why.
That's right.
Wow.
they can keep people in the dark about so many things
Yeah.
all the time. Like even in, I think it was China, that Tiananmen Square, apparently the people that lived in China don't hardly even ever heard about this thing, and yet everybody else in the world does, like it's...
Well, what's really scary though was, I read it, it was the Time or Newsweek a couple of years ago, where they had gone in and they interviewed a bunch of 20-something Chinese young up-and-coming professionals, who weren't working out in the rice paddies. They were all in computer, IT tech, and all this stuff, right? And they talked to them about Tiananmen Square and what had happened there. And they knew what had happened there, because, I mean, they got access to the internet, so, you know. And all of them said virtually the same thing. They said, oh yes, that was a terrible thing, very regrettable, but necessary.
Oh,
But necessary.
But necessary.
Oh,
brainwashed.
Oh, they're all brainwashed.
wow.
Yeah. So, you
What
know,
else would you say?
Yeah.
well, they had a lot to say, but that was the gist of it, right, you know? So, you know, we can't really expect any, you know, massive epiphany to happen in China.
No.
You know.
We're in a medical
So,
association.
younger
so-
people get older, yeah. So, yeah, so we use this little device to do all sorts of things. Now, as the name implies, Acuscope, you can use it to treat acupuncture points, acupuncture meridians. You can do an acupuncture treatment with this, but you can also treat other things not using acupuncture meridians. Like the people that I treated for, you know, wounds that would not heal, you know, we weren't using acupuncture points. We were going right to that area and just stimulating it to heal. And I've done work with other people who had broken bones where, you know, we just stick a probe in the top and the bottom of the cast and pass microcurrent through the bone and stimulate the healing. And I've seen people who were told, oh, you'll be in this cast 6 weeks. And after 3 weeks from the x-ray, they said, oh, let's take the cast off, it's healed. You know, so you can, in some cases, you can cut the healing time virtually in half.
Well, some people were using, they said, heavy magnets out even over the bones would cause healing faster in bones.
Yeah.
More pain, but faster healing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, magnets are very, very useful for lots of things too. Because again, magnetic fields will stimulate and generate electrical fields within the body. And it sounds silly, but magnets will attract red blood cells, because red blood cells contain iron, and iron is extremely magnetic, right?
And copper, anytime you move a magnet through a copper, if there's copper, it creates energy too.
Yes.
As soon as you take a magnet and try to put it through a copper pipe, it doesn't stick to the outside, but it'll slow it right down.
Oh yeah, it won't go through it
So
quickly, yeah. Oh no, yeah.
amazing stuff, you know.
Oh yeah, well, you know, Tesla, if you read any of Tesla's books, he was right into magnetism.
Oh, yeah.
And he was very convinced. And, you know, there are, you know, some tremendous medical uses for magnets, absolutely.
Who's into photonic? Because to discover that I'm a light being, although there's many people around that already are practicing hands-on and, you know, and transmission of light energy, and
Yeah.
who's working on that?
On what?
On piezoelectric and piezophotonics.
There are people, I can't give you a name off the top of my
Okay,
head.
but
There
if
are-
I Google it, something will
Oh
come
yeah,
up.
there's research out there that are doing all kinds of research on piezophotonic effects in fashion. I couldn't go to it, but there was a big conference in Vancouver 2 years ago. It was all about that.
Wow.
It's just all about the latest research in fashion, and particularly in piezoelectronics and piezophotonics in fashion, and how that related to health issues.
Isn't MS the pulling back of fascia?
No.
Oh, okay.
MS is the deterioration of the myelin sheath
Myelin
around
sheath.
the nerve.
Different sheath, okay.
Yeah, well, myelin is fat.
Okay.
All the nerves in your body and all the brain cells in your body have a layer of fat around the outside, because fat is an incredibly effective insulator against electrical current, right? So, you know, just like the wires in a computer all have a plastic sheath, right? So you don't get crosstalk, you don't get electrons jumping from one wire to another. Same thing happens in our bodies, only we use fat, because we don't make plastic inside of us, right? So the fat acts as an insulator. And so when the pathological process of MS is the deterioration of the fatty sheath
Yeah.
on the outside of the nerve, and then nerve impulses can't travel through it properly.
Is ALS, isn't that like a sclerosis type of a thing too? Like,
Similar, yeah. It's a similar process, but not exactly the same. And again, it affects the myelin sheath on the outside of the nerves. And they become, as you said, sclerotic and hard, you know. And again, so that the nerve impulse can't travel. With MS, it's a little different. What happens is you get like holes. You know, the myelin sheath just disappears in certain spots. Right? So it's a very similar process, and then the result is fairly similar, but they are different, in fact.
Have you had any work with people with ALS? Through this
I haven't worked with anybody with ALS. I've worked with some people with MS, and we've had varying results. You know? Because with MS, as with any kind of really serious chronic disease like that, a huge amount of your success depends on the patient and what they're willing to do and not willing to do. And some people, as crazy as it might sound, you know, you would think if you had MS, you'd do anything, you know, including dance around naked and spit chicken bones out or whatever, you know, if you had some hope that it would actually do something for you. And yet I've run into people where we started talking about dietary changes and stuff, and they go, "Whoa, I don't know if I can give up French fries. You know, I love them."
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, that's what I-
if that's more important to you than getting your nerve function back, cool. You know?
Yeah, I hit one guy there, he's diagnosed with ALS now, and they looked for a long time, and I says to his wife, I says, you know, you'd have to make some extreme changes in his life, you know, well, he's trying to cut back on this and cut, I says, no, you'd have to cut out all kinds of things, you know, like, and you'd have to try to build, you'd have to work, you'd probably have to really exercise to try to fight this thing, you know.
Well, you know,
You can't lay there and wait for the doctor to give you a pill, because that's where you're going to stay.
But a lot of people prefer that, right? Bernie Siegel, in his book, Love, Medicine, and Miracles. How many people have read that book? Nobody.
But then he wrote others. He wrote others.
Yeah, the first one he wrote, though, was Love, Medicine, and Miracles.
Oh.
And in there he talks about a specific research study that was done in New York City with terminal cancer patients. These people are definitely going to die very soon. Okay? And they offered them a choice. They said, here's your choice. You make 5 significant lifestyle changes. We guarantee 100% that your cancer is gone completely and will never, ever, ever come back. Or you opt for a surgical procedure with only a 50-50 chance of success at getting rid of your cancer and no guarantee that it won't come back within 5 years. Which do you choose? Over 80% of them chose the surgical procedure with only a 50-50 chance of success. Because making major lifestyle changes is just too scary for people. So if you think about that for a minute, that they're more scared of making lifestyle changes than dying of cancer, that tells you how powerful that is. So anytime you're working with anybody, whether it's MS, ALS, or anything like that, if they are unwilling to make significant changes in their lifestyle, the chances of them being successful in beating that problem are very slim. Because there is no miracle cure applied from the outside in that's going to fix that, right? They have to change it from the inside out. And that involves changes, and it always involves nutritional changes, because that old adage, you are what you eat, is absolutely true. And I know I've beaten that horse to death off of this pulpit a number of times when we've talked about nutrition, but it is, it's there, you know. And if people want to eat things that are going to cause them problems, they're going to have problems.
I gotta go back to Edith again.
Yeah.
You remember old Herman, when he started this group with us many years ago?
Yes.
He went to Edith and he went to her house and he
Yeah.
says, you throw this stuff out, you gotta change all this, you gotta get rid of this, you gotta do this and this. And she started humming on, well, I can't throw that out, I paid this much for it, I can't get rid of it. He says, well, I'll write your name in my book here. If you need a pallbearer, get rid of it. He says, so she did. She changed, and everything she changed. She was walking with a cane and morphine, chronic pain management.
Yeah.
They were radiating her hips and pelvis a little bit. She made all this change, big time.
Yeah.
Within 3 months, the cane was gone.
Yeah.
6 months, she's yelling at me on some phone that she doesn't have cancer anymore.
Yeah.
You know, like
Oh, yeah.
18 years later, she dies of a stroke with no cancer. You know,
Yeah.
like.
Oh yeah, well I mean,
But
those
she
things
did
are
it.
beatable, but people have to be willing to make those changes.
And she did. She
And
made it.
those that do will see positive results. Those that won't. You know,
That's right, yeah.
it's as simple as that.
Only go.
Everybody has to be willing to take responsibility for themselves.
And you gotta listen to your body, you know, like when you notice something,
Yeah.
you better make some changes. You know, don't just take an aspirin.
Well,
You
you know,
should
unfortunately,
look at it.
you know, people get socially conditioned. And the medical profession and the pharmaceutical companies have done an excellent job
Brainwash.
of brainwashing the general public into thinking that health comes in a little pill, you know? And that if you go to your doctor and he checks you out and figures out which drug do you need, and you get on that, then you'll be good. You'll be healthy and happy. It's all a big lie, but, you know, unfortunately, you know, every propaganda machine in history, you know, going back to, you know, the Roman Empire and the Ottoman Empire and the Nazi Germany Empire and everything, know that if you tell the big lie big enough and loud enough and long enough, you get enough people repeating it, everybody assumes it's the truth.
Tiananmen Square was needed.
Yeah, it was necessary.
That's,
Sad, incredible, but necessary.
yeah.
We're good.
You know,
You can only help those who are willing to help themselves.
that's right.
Brian, I think you heard me say that I have a torn
Rotator cuff.
cuff.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm going to Torn Migliazza
Yeah.
at the Heritage for
Okay.
physio.
Right.
This is my third one coming up tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
And he, of course, is using the interferential
Yeah.
treatment, I mean, like that, ultrasound, I guess you'd call it, something like that. Could this be used at the same time?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh, hook it up.
Not in the sense that we would put this on and put the
Oh, no,
infrared
I
on
meant like if I...
simultaneously.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're doing one day over there and one day over here,
Okay.
they're not going to interfere
That
with
would
each
be
other.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Try it.
That might be.
But microcurrent therapy, you can't be doing any other therapy to the body at the same time, or it just gets
No.
confused.
Okay.
Cancel each other.
Yeah, they cancel each other out.
It's like he's doing it right now 3 times a week. I don't know how
Okay.
long that's going to go on. And I'm not sure at what point, no, probably a long time.
I don't
I'm
know.
not sure whether I should.
Yeah. Well, I would say this, you know, for things like torn muscles and torn ligaments, this is a superior technology for stimulating the body to heal that.
Okay.
And I mean, yeah, interferential current will speed up the healing process as well. There's nothing wrong with that. Just that this is better.
Okay.
Simple as that.
As you put treatment in that clinic, over there, we've got it.
Holy smokes, it's after 9 o'clock. Not that
Oh,
long.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.